All right, welcome to episode 102 of the Jake Blanchard podcast. I'm here with my friend, Dr. Chad Wollner. He's a doctor of chiropractic medicine. He's a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu practitioner. He's an educator. He spends time supporting other chiropractors and folks who are looking to grow and scale their businesses. He and I have had some fun conversations over the years, talking about business, talking about mindset, talking about motivation. I'm excited to chat with him today. And then also, we both recently lost a dear friend, Professor Keith Owen. Chad was very close to Professor Keith. He actually spoke recently at his service, his memorial service, his celebration of life, if you will. So I'm excited to talk about all things kind of business and functional medicine and jiu-jitsu, and think about our good friend, Professor Keith Owen. Chad, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate it. I'm excited as well. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while, so excited to be here.
Well, brother, I'm excited. I'm in your studio, man. I'm at your location here. You've got a whole setup here with a Rodecaster and some microphones and this whole deal. So thanks for hosting me today.
Of course.
Physically. Man, let's get to know you a little bit. I'd love to hear, I actually don't know a lot about your background, like where you grew up and then what attracted you to chiropractic medicine, functional medicine, those types of things. Maybe take me on that trajectory.
Yeah, I always say long story short, but it winds up being short story long is what it is. But I was growing up, I was into sports in high school. Before high school, I started when I was about 10 years old, started playing guitar, but guitar really took kind of a prominent place in my life around high school. I was in several different bands, swore I was going to be a rock star. And then went and served a mission for my church that kind of changed the trajectory of my life in a very positive way, which was great. Came home and met my wife shortly thereafter. We got married. Wasn't sure what I was going to do. Had literally zero schooling under my belt. Started getting all of my undergrad ready, or kind of just going through your generals. And decided, kind of settled upon dentistry. I had a good friend of mine. He was a mentor of mine, and he was a really successful dentist, and he seemed to lead a really happy, fulfilling life. And I was like, what is it that you do? And he's like, I'm a dentist. And so I was like, okay, well, let me do some observations with you. And so I went and did some observing and really kind of enjoyed what I saw. And I was like, I can do this. This seems like this would be a good fit for me. And so I was almost ready to take the DAT exam, which is your dental entrance exam. And my wife and I were out on a date. We got in a car wreck. She sustained some injuries. We weren't sure what to do. Kind of as a last resort, we took her to a chiropractor because she wasn't certain about chiropractic. Neither was I. We didn't really have a terribly good background on chiropractic. We just hadn't had a whole lot of experience or exposure to it. And so we took her and had just an incredible experience. The chiropractor we took her to was just, he was great. His name is Dr. Vroom, Vroom, in Portland, Oregon, or Gresham, Oregon. And had just such a powerful experience there. Everything he said made so much sense. It was very logical. And more importantly, he was able to get amazing results with her where no one else could. We had taken her to a couple other doctors, and so all of a sudden I started looking at this experience, and I was like, I don't know what this is all about, but I want to find out more. And so we went and found out that there was a chiropractic college not too far from us in Portland, and we went and toured the school, and we went and they allowed us to kind of sit in just briefly on one of the lectures, and I just fell in love with it. I was just so blown away at the detail of the training that they were receiving. And I always tell this story, like I, to this day, can recall exactly what they were talking about when we walked in on a lecture. It was Dr. Lester Partna, and he was teaching about biomechanics of the pelvis. And they were getting into such incredible detail on it. And I was like, if this is the level of detail that people are learning about the human body and how it works and how it functions, I'm like, I'm all in. Like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is, I could tell that it was something where they were becoming masters of this particular craft. And there was just something so cool and motivating to me about that. And I was like, okay, I'm all in. This is what I'm going to do. And my wife was super supportive. She was like, you go for it. And so
How far were you down the dentistry path again?
I was about ready to take the entrance exam. So I can't even remember how, but close. I was about to take the entrance exam, and I didn't have to change paths because pre-dentistry is the same as pre-med, is the same as pre-chiropractic. Chiropractic is the same as pre-physical therapy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like at that point in time, you can kind of decide and choose which route you want to go.
Did anybody in your close, like your circles, have some, I don't know, you get advice from people coming through. They're like, hey, why don't you just do the dentist path? Like, why the chiropractic change?
Yeah, no, I really didn't. In fact, what was really cool was at the time, there was a leader in my church who was a primary care. I think he was an internist is what he was. He was a medical doctor. And I happened to see him in the medical setting. I needed a checkup or something like that, just a general physical or whatever. And he's like, hey, how are you? Good. And he's like, what are you up to? And I said, I'm actually getting ready to get into, I'm applying to chiropractic college. And he was like, oh, that's awesome. And he said something to me that is so profound today because you don't hear this typically from medical doctors. But he said, you want to know something really cool I heard years ago that chiropractors really have figured out? And I said, sure. And again, I was still new to this whole area. And he says, you want to know what the job of a real doctor is? And I said, sure. And he says, a real doctor's job is to humor the patient while the body heals itself. And that's a very famous quote. I can't remember who the original person was that said that, but I was like so blown away at that. I was like, wow, that's really cool, and that's kind of, to a certain extent, that's a lot that has influenced my kind of outlook and philosophy. I think far too often all doctors, chiropractors, medical doctors, dentists, you name them, they take way too much credit for what they do, in the sense that, like, recognizing, like, if it weren't for the body's miraculous ability to do what it does, the human body makes doctors look really awesome, right? So that was just kind of, yeah. So to answer your original question, everybody around me that I can recall was super supportive. They were like, yeah, that's cool, man. Go do that. I didn't have a whole lot of critics in terms of, I think my in-laws were particularly supportive, just knowing the path that I had come from. When we got married, like, I had no schooling under my belt, so I think my in-laws were like super excited and supportive of, like, okay, yay, he's gonna do something.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I was gonna ask as well, and we can put a pin in the kind of the trajectory from a career standpoint.
Yeah.
But I know, like, living in specifically this part of the country, I know a lot of people who left after high school to go on mission trips. And I'm particularly curious about your experience and going into that, and how it maybe shaped your perspective on who you are today, or maybe some of the knowledge that you gathered. So where did you go, and like, what is that experience like? Help me understand.
Yeah, that's a great question. I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Baton Rouge, Louisiana mission.
Oh, my dad's from just south of Baton Rouge.
Oh, really?
He's from Belrose, Louisiana, from Donaldsonville.
Okay.
So if you go south of Baton Rouge, you're at Gonzales.
Okay.
And if you go south of Gonzales, you kind of hit Napoleonville, Donaldsonville.
Okay. I never made it out that way, but I was just about everywhere else on southern Louisiana, like south of Baton Rouge. That's exactly. Our mission covered kind of pretty much Baton Rouge and then everything south of that. So New Orleans area, that was actually my first area, was Mid-City, New Orleans was where I was at.
I was born in Lafayette.
Oh, were you? Yeah, I served in Lafayette. Okay. I was in the Lafayette South area, which was like there's a college there. I can't remember what college.
UL Lafayette.
Okay. Yeah. So we were in that kind of college town area there. But I say this, from a mile up, I always tell people serving a mission for my church was the single most pivotal experience of my entire life. Greatest decision I ever made, even above, I tell people, even above my marriage to my wife, because it set the stage for me getting married to my wife. So I attribute so much of who I am today, the good things that have come into my life as a direct result of having made that decision to serve a mission for my church. And that's on multiple levels, on spiritual levels that a lot of people would kind of assume, but also from kind of more of a pragmatic standpoint. There are so many life skills that you learn and develop at that. That's such, I look back at it, and those are such formative years, from age 19 to 21, we served for 2 years, such formative years. And during that time, you are learning so much about life in general, and obviously I recognize too, having a lot more years under my belt now, that you're being deeply entrenched in the faith, and I think that's a good thing, but I think some people can think otherwise, and I get that. I understand how people can have that perspective of it being kind of indoctrinating and whatnot, and I get that. I totally understand that. But for me, it was such a powerful experience on so many levels, again, spiritual and practical. For me, it was really when I came, there was an experience that I had, and I don't even know if I can put it into words, but I was born and raised in the church. My parents were both converts to the church, and I distinctly remember on my mission, one of the most common questions that I got when we would knock on doors and whatnot is people would be like, and since then I've gotten questions like this too, where they're like, well, were you born and raised in the church? And at first I was kind of like almost hesitant or reluctant to answer that question because I knew what was coming next. Well, the only reason you believe what you believe is because you've been born and raised in the church. You don't know any different. And again, now looking back, having had experience, I can totally appreciate that to a higher degree. But at the time, as a young 19-year-old, you're just sensitive about that kind of stuff. And I remember an experience having been on my mission for about 2 or 3 months, so relatively new, but I remember my eyes being opened in a different way to seeing the faith in a very different way, to where it was becoming personal to me, whereas before, growing up in the church, at least for me anyways, I just kind of went through the motions and didn't really develop a sufficiently personal experience with the faith and or with God. And for me, it became far more personal and far more real. And so I remember this experience of like being almost like shocked, if that's it's such a limited, I have such a limited vocabulary in terms of describing it, but that's the best way I could describe it. Shocked at like, holy cow, is this the same faith that I was raised in? Because it seemed so much different. And all of a sudden it became so much more personal and so much more real and so much more important to me, if that makes sense. And so it was really profound, and it was really powerful, and it was an exciting experience. So what the experience was like, at least my experience, was in Louisiana in the South, you can imagine, it's a very deeply religious area.
I was going to ask that. One, I can only imagine going door to door.
Yeah.
In 100 degrees with 100% humidity.
Yeah.
It's like living in Tupperware in the summer.
In a shirt and tie and suit.
In a shirt and tie and a suit. And, that's, there's a little sprawl out there as well, especially when you get out into the country a little bit.
Totally.
And so the houses are further in between. There's a lot of animals,
yes,
dogs and those types of things in people's yards,
yes,
and running loose. And,
yeah.
I imagine it'd be nerve-wracking.
Dude, it was, yeah. For me, looking back now, the naivety of youth is probably to a certain extent a blessing in terms of that, because looking back now, I'm like, I don't know if I would do that again, at least to that degree, man. It was intense. Yeah, so in terms of what that was like, your schedule as a missionary, and things have changed, so I don't know if it's the same now in terms of what missionaries do. All I can say is my experience. And I think the church culturally, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, people refer to us as Mormons, and the leader of our church, President Nelson, has really urged members of our church to really get back to the actual official name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
And educate a simpleton here. Where does that word even...
Mormon?
Yeah.
Mormon it's a nickname. Originally, from what I understand, it was originally intended as almost a derogatory term, because we have a belief in a book of scripture called the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon, as a quick summary, is a book of scripture that Mormon was a prophet historian in ancient America, and he collected writings from other ancient prophets who lived here on the American continent, and he aggregated them, is that the right word? Collected them, curated them, put them together in one volume of scripture. similar to the Bible. But the fundamental difference is that the Book of Mormon predominantly takes place in the ancient Americas. And so the nickname Mormon comes from the belief in the Book of Mormon. And so, missionaries, at least when I was there, it was, I don't want to say militant, but it was like
structured, disciplined.
Yes. Okay. Very disciplined, and very much our mission president was kind of like he really was a great leader in terms of he had a lot of charisma looking back now. Like, I wouldn't have described it as that necessarily back then, but it was very much, he made you feel like you were a part of a noble cause, exciting. And so I was super zealous, and I was like all in, and still to this day, like, so I want to make it really clear to anybody who's listening. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, they're not young, naive Chad, you were such a moron, and now like I'm so sophisticated. As my faith is still very much a part of me, for sure. Yeah. And I'm very strong, and I would consider myself a devout member of the church. That being said, though, I also would like to make it super clear that I also try to be super open-minded, far more so than when I was there, just because of life experience, having so many friends of different faiths. And so I'm very much, while I'm resolutely devout in my faith, I'm also super open to discussing and sharing, and I'm far less concerned with being right than back then. As a 19-year-old on a mission, it was all about being right. Yeah. Very much like, I've got the truth and I'm going to share it with you, and I sure as heck hope that you accept the truth, because if not, I can't. There's no guarantees. You know what I mean? That was kind of, and it wasn't.
That's the mindset. Sure.
It wasn't like I was never like, oh, you're going to hell or anything like that. But it was very much like, to my bones and to my core, it was like I knew that what I had was to say was true and to share was true, and there was almost like this deep concern and worry for the welfare of other people's souls. And there still is that, in the faith. But again, for me, I'm far less concerned these days about being right. I'm more concerned about being a good person and just being good to other people than I am about, if that makes sense.
No, totally makes sense. And pulling on that same thread, like, you get some life experience, you get perspective, those types of things. I can't help but think, and I've always thought this about anyone who's out on a mission, because a lot of times I see, there's kind of an entrepreneur spirit, at least
totally
in the Church of Latter-day Saints. I see a lot of, folks getting into businesses that they can run themselves. Totally. And I imagine you're getting a master class for 2 years
100%
of objection handling,
yes,
as well as like doors being slammed in your face,
resiliency,
yes,
and
just like building calluses. And so like, when did you recognize that kind of, that bridge of soft skills?
And let me just say, man, you ask great questions. These are such good questions. So let me, to answer that, let me just say, like, kind of our routine when I was there was, as you can imagine, again, it was predominantly a combination. It was like this melting pot of Catholic and Pentecostal and Baptist was the predominant kind of faith, and or a mixture of various non-denominationals that would have their roots tied into Baptist Pentecostal-ish, that sort of thing. That was kind of the mix. But occasionally we would meet Jewish people, we would meet some Muslims, we would meet some other kind of maybe less known different faiths and things like that, but predominantly I would say the majority Catholic, Baptist, Pentecostal. And so, as you can imagine, that was challenging in and of itself. And so our typical schedule was, we would get up at 6 a.m. We would do personal study for an hour. We would do companionship study for an hour. And that was typically like prepping and understanding discussions and understanding like communication skills and things like that we were learning. And then we would be out the door, breakfast, and then we would be out the door by 9. And more often than not, the ideal was you would have appointments, teaching appointments set up all throughout the day, and service. So we would typically do service a couple times a week. Service would be like helping out we did some service at an art museum. We did some service at a care home for people, mentally handicapped people. We did service at various places. Like, you would just do it all. It was just whatever you could find. We would just do service.
And I can't help to like, take the faith out of it.
Yeah.
If you're 19 to 21 years old, like, what a great opportunity for you in life to be able to lead with gratitude, lead with service.
Oh, so much.
Right? Regardless of your faith,
Yeah.
like if you've got kids that are getting ready to go out into the world, like that community service, that like seeing how others live,
Yes.
like helping, even, you know, I worked in a retirement home for 2 years. I saw different people come in, but like that kind of perspective,
Totally.
I reflect on all the time. So I imagine you're in a target-rich environment for perspective.
Totally. And it was extremes, right? We would, some areas we would serve in were predominantly like trailer parks and ghettos and projects. You know, several areas we served in had like deep in New Orleans had projects. And then we also served in...
Well, they call them wards too.
Right, wards. Yeah, exactly. And then we had an area outside of New Orleans. It was a suburb called Metairie, and super affluent neighborhood. This was the neighborhood where Al Copeland lived. Do you know who Al Copeland is? He's the founder. He's the guy who started Popeye's Chicken. He would, and to put it in perspective, like every Christmas and holiday time, he would put out in front of his house on his massive driveway his fleet of Lamborghinis for everybody to kind of like showcase as kind of fun. He would put up Christmas lights and then his fleet of Lamborghinis for people to just drive by and admire. You know, it was like really funny. So, but so our schedule, you know, ideally was teaching, but more often than not, we had a minimum requirement of 12 hours a week, which for us went way above and beyond that because we just had nothing else to do, of door knocking. So you had a minimum at our time of 12 hours a week of straight proselyting, where you're knocking doors and just, hey, I'm Elder Woolner from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have a message we'd like to share with you. And I don't know what the percentage was. It was probably 80-90% of doors being shut, you know, or whatever, to various degrees. Some polite, some less than polite, you know. And then
I imagine you see some firearms while you were out there.
Once or twice, yeah. We had a guy pull a gun on us, and been hit by 2 cars while I was on a bike. But was okay, thankfully. It was hitting a cross. I was in a crosswalk, and this gal wasn't looking where she was driving, and so she plowed into me. Thankfully, no injuries, no nothing. It was crazy. And then the other was riding my bike past somebody was pulling out from a grocery store and plowed into me. But yeah, so we were either door knocking, or the other thing that we would do in New Orleans, predominantly in the city, we would run what are called media referrals, where basically the church at the time down there would run TV ads for a free copy of the Bible, or a free copy of the Book of Mormon, or a free video called The Lamb of God, which was a kind of a documentary type movie, short film about Jesus Christ and his life. And so people would call this free 1-800 number to get this, you know, thing, and we'll have representatives deliver it to you. They could choose to either have representatives deliver it or just mail it straight out. And so if they said, and the church would always be like, hey, would you like representatives? And they're like, sure, yeah, that's cool. So then we would get a notification, so-and-so at this address has ordered a Lamb of God video. And so we would then go and deliver it, and ideally say, hey, we'd love to teach a message to you as well. And then that would, you know, hopefully lead into discussions and things like that. Yeah. So between that, we were usually, you know, the minimum tracting was 12 hours. We typically were probably tracting closer to like 15 to 20 hours a week was pretty typical for us throughout the mission. And it's funny because we would have these blue planners. These they were on cardstock, they were printed, and they would have your weekly schedule on them that you would just write out, and we would fold them and we would put them in our shirt pocket, and I kept every one of those, and I have them in a binder, and they're thick. And what's really funny about those is you can tell the summer months by the discoloration of the... Oh,
I bet those things just crinkled up,
just all the sweat and stuff, just like, and so it's really cool. And so I kind of like look back on those as like it's like a symbol of pride for me, knowing while I certainly don't claim to be the best missionary, I know I worked hard. I know I worked really, really hard. And for the longest time, and I think I still have them in a trunk somewhere in our garage. I'll have to go back and look, but I have a pair of my shoes, Doc Martens. And the reason why you bought Doc Martens was because they were supposedly indestructible. You know, not the case. You know, I wore those shoes out. I wore them out to the point that they had holes in the soles. And again, that's just kind of a marker of pride, knowing I didn't sit in my apartment all day. And that was, for me, the thing that I clued into, kind of going back to your original question about like preparation for business and life and whatnot. The thing that was powerful for me that I did connect, I didn't necessarily connect the entrepreneurial preparation necessarily, but what I did connect was this whole idea of my mission president and my parents and or any other authority figures weren't there standing over me. Like there were times I was in an area called La Rose, which was deep. Did you ever know La Rose? It was like deep in the south. Like it was down on the bayou. Like, so our whole area covered all the way to the Gulf, including what's called Grand Isle, which is a little island off of. So we covered all the way down there. And I just remember thinking, when I was down there in La Rose, like we were hours of a drive away from the mission home in Baton Rouge. And I just distinctly recall, like, if I want to sit in my apartment all day, I can. If I want to goof off, if I want to go, break whatever mission rules I want, go hang out with girls and do whatever, I can do that. But I didn't. Yeah. And I got up early in the mornings, and I, you know what I mean? And I worked hard on my mission because of a sense of duty and a sense of purpose, and also just this whole idea of doing what you say you're going to do, and that was very formative for me in terms of learning. And so what that taught me was self-discipline. It taught me, to stick with things even when they're hard, which has really served me well. That's something I think that is sorely lacking today collectively. People live in such an instant gratification day and age. It's just the world is essentially shaped and featured to really exploit that kind of side of human nature. And I think it's my dad taught me this growing up, and I think it wasn't really instilled and learned until the mission gave me the opportunity to learn this. But my dad is one of the biggest preachers of delayed gratification, just really understanding that the best things in life come about when people are willing to devote themselves to a higher cause, such that the payoff comes later rather than immediately,
Yeah, being interested in the journey.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And understanding that that's where the most valuable lessons are typically learned is on the path there, as opposed to at the top of the mountain.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you get this good foundation, this good perspective from mission. You have a career shift, or at least at the beginning, educationally. Yeah. You go through chiropractic school. Yep. Obviously, you have a very successful clinic here in Idaho with Align Integrated Medicine. Take me through that. What was that? Was that like? You get out of school? Did you open up your own practice right away? Did you go work for someone else in Understudy?
Yeah, I worked for a year for two docs, Dr. Arnold and Dr. Allen. Worked for them for about a year with the intent to buy their practice. Things didn't work out, and we left on really good terms. And long story short, at that time, 2009, started at the time Align Chiropractic. Went through 4 years of struggle and a lot of learning experiences. We'll call it that. And again, long story short, at that time, kind of figured some things out. Right at that time, Russell Brunson was launching ClickFunnels. He asked me if I would be a beta tester for that software, and I was like, sure, man, that's cool. And he had kind of been a mentor to me and a friend during this time, and given me some kind of pep talks here and there during the struggle. And again, started figuring some things out, started using ClickFunnels, turned the practice around, started experiencing, some traction and some success there, which was really, really cool. Right around that time, a good friend of mine here locally, another chiropractor, Dr. Matt Ogle, was starting his practice. He was struggling, same sort of scenario that I had been through, and similar bad advice that he had gotten from some consulting groups. And so
there's a lot of that out there, by the way.
Yeah. I'm sure.
As a consultant that goes out and pitches my services to different organizations, you can tell when you're walking in and someone's got scars, that they've wasted time or money, or the output wasn't even close to what they expected. That's difficult.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. I can appreciate your perspective of probably getting frustrated with that title being used and abused, very much like today, ad agencies.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that term's been kind of very diluted, or marketers just in general. Marketers have just gotten such a bad rap.
Yeah, it's kind of like a catch-all though. Like consulting is just such a big body of work, and within that, you're going to have really great consultants.
Totally.
And then you're going to have what we call seagull consultants, the ones that just kind of like fly in, they crap on you, and then they fly away, and they're just take everything off your towel on the beach, and you're like, oh no.
The term that I'm super proud of this. The term that I coined in our profession, in our realm, was we refer to these types of consultants and or marketers. We'll lump them all together for the sake of it. We call them carpetbaggers. Oh, really? Or that's what I call it. Because if you know history, the carpetbaggers, those were the guys that were post Civil War, who basically, when the South was in shambles, they swooped in and basically sold people garbage, and then took the train to the next town and sold the next, unsuspecting group of people, and then the next.
It took advantage of the coming out of crisis.
Yeah, exactly. And so similarly, you see a lot of the same mentality with these people who swoop in, sell whatever they're going to sell, aren't really concerned about the results. They're just more concerned about closing the sale, and then that's that, which is interesting too, because I'm not opposed to the idea of closing a sale in that terminology, but what we have in our group, our group of doctors that we consult, we tend to use the nomenclature enroll. When we talk about patients who are signing up, we don't say, did you close the patient? We talk about, did you enroll the patient? Because for us, closing seems very final, like the end of the relationship, versus enrolling seems like it's the start and the beginning of the relationship, if that makes sense. That's what we just, that's the terminology we use.
Makes perfect sense, yeah.
So anyways.
So you and what a cool and unique experience to meet or to be around Russell.
Oh yeah.
At the genesis,
yes,
if you will, of ClickFunnels.
Yeah,
which,
totally.
I mean, wildly successful,
yes,
unbelievable, international tool and brand, and all the knowledge and expertise that goes around his ecosystem as well. So, like, what was that like in maturing your practice and getting into the consulting piece as well?
Yeah, it's kind of surreal looking at it now, because like at the time that I met Russell, he was like famous in the internet marketing space, kind of the underworld of internet marketers, if you will. Like a lot of the names that people now might become a little bit more familiar with, just because of, quite frankly, I no offense to any of these guys, but it's largely because of Russell Brunson that a lot of these kind of previously not known in kind of household name marketers are now very much well known, like Mike Filsaine, Ryan Dice, and again, I don't mean to insult like any of these guys. If they hear this, they're like, what an a-hole.
I don't think they'd be insulted by it. I mean, there's certainly
because they've done their own things, right?
100%.
So many of these different guys, because I think Mike Filsaine got involved with and now is a partner with a software company. What is it? Him and Andy, they're a competitor to ClickFunnels, and they're really good too, from what I've heard. I'll come up with it. It's a software company. My buddy uses their software. But anyways, a lot of these. So what I was getting at though was it was kind of cool, because in the internet marketing world, he was well known amongst internet marketers as a good internet marketer. And then all of a sudden, there's just been this explosion where all of a sudden, because I remember at the time when we met, he was like, holy cow, Chad. He's like, I'm going to go meet Tony Robbins. He invited me to come speak at his business mastery event. And I was like, holy crap, like what's going on? You're going to go meet Tony Robbins. And it's crazy now, because like he and Tony Robbins are like really good friends. Like they're business partners now. Like he works with Tony Robbins.
Didn't he like write a book with him or something like that? Or
Tony Robbins
put out some content with him?
Oh, tons. So Tony Robbins wrote the foreword in, I think it's Traffic Secrets. But Tony Robbins wrote Tony Robbins wrote the foreword in Expert Secrets, I believe. So anyways, I may have that backwards, but and then they formed that business, consulting, or not consulting, that's Sam Ovens' course. What is it? Mastermind.com.
That might be what I'm thinking about.
Him and Tony Robbins and Dean Graciosi are all partners in Mastermind.com. And they launched that, and that was like a huge success and really massive and big. But to answer your original question, yeah, it's been surreal just to see, just how far he has taken that. And what's interesting is what drives Russell is not the money, even though it looks from the outside in, it might look like, what do you mean? It's like always, about growing and creating more money. What drives him is he's just a natural born competitor. It's the wrestler in him. If you were to ask him and truly get to the core of like, why do you do what you do? He just naturally is born competitive. He loves wrestling. That's what he loves about it. He's just super competitive. And so for him, he looks at the whole business world as no different than the wrestling landscape. It's a game. It's a sport. It's this, and money, he always has said, is the way of just tracking that, tracking your success in terms of that. And so that's what kind of motivates him. But what's interesting is he has smashed so many kind of records in that realm. You know what I mean? Very much like an Olympian who is forced to, once you've studied like all these Olympic athletes, once they reach that gold, for a lot of them, it's very challenging psychologically to like look at the purpose and meaning of life afterwards, because they're like, I've accomplished, I can't go any further, quote unquote. And so for a lot of people, it's one of two things. They implode for a lot of people, or for others, it forces them to look beyond themselves in terms of, where do I derive meaning in life? Is it about my personal achievements, or is it about my kind of and then again, I think because of Tony Robbins' influence in Russell Brunson's life, Tony Robbins, he talks about the 6 human needs. And if you look at them, it's almost like they're like not diametrically, but they're like yin and yang opposites, right? The baseline human need is certainty. And then when you have enough certainty, you crave variety. And then when you have variety, you look for significance. And then with significance, after that, it's love and so significance is me. And then love and connection is all about you and somebody else. And then growth is the 5th human need, which is like all about, again, expanding one's self, achieving goals, which is, none of these things are bad, right? They're just needs, right? And then the final is contribution, right? It's about oneself. And that's something that's been really cool to see with Russell, is that if you look, his involvement and his commitment and his drive in philanthropy has been massive. Now he's very much heavily involved in OUR, Operation Underground Railroad, which is Tim Ballard's organization, where they go and they help rescue kids from child slavery. And then he's very much involved in Stu McLaren's organization, which I can't remember what it is, but they build schools for kids in Kenya, and so he's involved in that, and probably several others too that I'm not even aware of. But it's interesting because I think Russell has done a great job of shifting his kind of purpose above and beyond just ClickFunnels and making money and growing business, although he's certainly focused on that, but.
Yeah, and I think you're drawing out, again, a really interesting point here, one that I have some personal experience with, which is being able to move your own mountain. Like, I talk about this on the podcast sometimes, is, I got married at a fairly young age, 22-ish. To my long-term high school sweetheart. So we've been together 5 years.
That's awesome.
We're together 18 years now, 12 years married.
Wow.
We've got 2 kids, 8 and 6, got the white picket fence and the half-acre house, and out in a safe neighborhood out in Middleton, and the golden retriever and the truck that I like to drive. And we've got some toys, and we have great weekends and great family vacations. And we were able to achieve a lot of that at what I would say a fairly young age. And to your point, what happens is that complacency can really easily set in. So it's like, okay, now do I just put it in cruise control or go? Or how do I realign around my life's purpose? How do I realign around what I want from my body, from my career, from what can I do? And if you don't have that internal dialogue, or at least go seek some knowledge to put your life up against some other scaffolding, it's really easy to fall into that trap.
Totally. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's nice that you called out, I guess, your perspective of a little bit of watching kind of Russell's journey, but you've got your journey here as well, right? Which is
totally
chiropractic medicine. And then now here's this really cool opportunity that sits on top of it to do some internet-based marketing and lead gen and help serve your clinic. So then how'd you tie those two together?
Yeah. So, so kind of to a certain extent stumbled into it through that. You know, I had mentioned my buddy Matt Ogle. He was struggling. I reached out to him. We had lunch, and basically I just tried to be an open book. I didn't view it as like, okay, I'm going to consult him. That wasn't how I viewed it. I was just like, let me just see if I can help you, and laid out for him kind of a game plan. And to his credit, and I always try and give him like as much credit as possible, because the truth be told is that he's the one who did the work. Like, truly, he took some good ideas, and they weren't even necessarily my good ideas. They were just things that I had learned from Russell and from other people and just had implemented. And he turned and transformed his practice. I mean, almost overnight. It was crazy. Like the most he'd done in practice was like $60K in a year. You cannot survive on $60K in collections in a practice. I mean, it's like, how do you cover, you know? And he had a really nice practice. So I mean, he was just drowning in overhead and drowning in just not making it work. Well, I think it was less than a year later, he had done or had just completely transformed it, so that the following year, from $60K to over $500K. I mean, just completely transformed it. I mean, it was, wow. Yeah, it was super cool. And now his practice is doing, we just talked last week, and I'm sorry, Matt, if I'm sharing too much. I don't think he'll care. I think he said they're on track to do about 1.3 million, which is just incredible. So, I mean, and just for the record, so I can be totally transparent, that's better than my clinic's doing, like, yeah, way better. And so I was just like so blown away by that. But again, credit goes to him. He put his nose to the grindstone, and he did the work, and he just did it, man. It was so cool. So to answer the original question, you know, how did that take place? It was a combination of getting to help him, and I find that super rewarding and fulfilling, helping others, and predominantly or primarily because I'm acutely aware of the pain that he was facing, because I've been there before. You know, I've experienced that kind of pain. And so I think a lot of times, and I don't know if this is, I'm stealing some quote or some, phrase from somebody, but I think oftentimes in life we derive a lot of our own personal purpose through our own personal pain, right? In terms of like, or I shouldn't even say personal purpose. We just derive purpose of helping others through our own personal pain, right? Because we recognize that in other people when people are dealing with the same struggles and challenges that we've been through. And so for me, I recognized after that point, I'm like, hey, there's value here in what I was able to do to help him. I wonder if others would find value in it as well. And so through that process evolving, we were able to develop an info product program called Chiro Funnel Secrets. We developed a webinar around that, and we, for the next, I think it was like 3 years or so, started selling that, and it took off and just did really, really well. And I became known for better or for worse, for good or for bad or whatever, as the funnel expert in the chiropractic community. I was the first chiropractor. I was one of the first 5 or 10 people to use ClickFunnels. I was definitely the first chiropractor to use ClickFunnels, and now or did I say ChiroFunnels? ClickFunnels.
ChiroFunnels.
ClickFunnels, and ClickFunnels is now a mainstay just about in terms of it's become standard in the industry in terms of how to, advertise and market your practice. And so, so that evolved. We did some live events, which were really, really cool. And then, and I'm missing a whole lot, but in terms of it, I'll condense it down. And basically COVID happened. That killed, to a large extent, a lot of what we were doing, because a lot of the funnels we were using were in-person kind of workshops, lunch workshops, dinner talks, things that, were not as virtual as one might think, and so it kind of it caused us to rethink and refocus and reshift. And we had things were already waning just a little bit naturally, just because they were, and so we were kind of revamping some things, but again, COVID kind of just killed it. And so we started looking at, okay, what can we now do? How can we pivot? And it was right around that time that I had started looking at, or I guess I should say re-looking at, if that's the right word, re-looking at.
We'll call it. We'll anoint it a word.
Yeah, we started looking into functional medicine in our practice for helping patients, because I had learned, and it's a whole nother story that we could go into, but I had learned functional medicine to help my wife. She had been struggling with some chronic health issues for years. So I went and got some additional training in functional medicine and thought that that's what I was going to do. I was like, oh man, this is awesome. This was great. I was able to help my wife with some of these issues. I want to help other people too. We're going to incorporate this into our practice. What I didn't realize at the time was like, it was going to require a complete and total overhaul in terms of the practice, because it just was a completely different flow and business model than the traditional chiropractic model. And so I tried to kind of Frankenstein it, is what I say, where it was like, okay, well, we'll just do like Mondays and Wednesdays, we'll see chiropractic patients, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we'll see and it was just like, no, that's not going to work that way. And so it kind of, I don't want to say crash and burn. We just kind of just were like, we're going to shelf this because it's just not going to fly. And it was frustrating because we would see every day at our clinic people struggling with these kind of chronic health issues, not getting answers. And so we were kind of forced to kind of like bite our tongue, so to speak, because I'm like, we just don't have the bandwidth or the resources or the infrastructure to be able to effectively help these people, even though we have the kind of technical know-how and the clinical skills of like, ooh, we can help these people, you know? And so for several years, we're just kind of like, that's not my lane that I'm going to be in. I'm just going to kind of stick with what I'm sticking with. And for whatever reason, I started like revisiting, like, what if we could change some of the bottlenecks and problems and challenges that were preventing us from being able to help these people? What if we could do it in a far more systemized and automated and leveraged way, using just better tools and technology and systems just in general to help these people? And so we started developing this kind of framework and fixing a lot of these problems. And then from kind of looking at it on like a whiteboard anyways, I discussed this idea with a friend of mine, a colleague, somebody who I had done some consulting for he's out in North Carolina, Dr. Andrew Wells. And I called him one day, we hopped on a Zoom call, and I'm like, listen, what if we could do a functional medicine program? And he's like, look, and he had a very similar experience to me. He's like, look, I've already been there, done that, no thanks. And he was very aversive to it because, again, similar experience that I had. And I was like, give me 45 minutes. Let me see if I can kind of convince you. And he's like, okay. And so we went to the whiteboard and I kind of drew it out for him. And then all of a sudden he like saw what we had developed and he's like, I think that'll work, you know? And we knew just from my own experience personally, because I had helped patients already, not just in my own practice, but I had done like this kind of quasi-virtual practice for a while, way back before like virtual practices were even a thing, you know, like telemedicine type stuff. This is like way back in 2015, you know, which is like, it was, people were barely talking about it back then, you know? And so I knew that the clinical stuff worked, you know, the protocols worked. So it wasn't a matter of like, let's see if this is good. We knew that these were, because these were based off of just really good, solid, sound, you know, clinical protocols and stuff. But we had just made it better. We incorporated more stuff that would just make it more effective, and we more well-rounded, less of just dispensing a handful of supplements and hoping patients get better, but really developing like an actual curriculum and program behind it. And so we launched this, and it took off really, really quickly for us, which was really cool to see, because I think a lot of doctors were looking for the same thing, because they wanted more resources and tools to be able to help patients, because these are such ubiquitous problems. And so it's one of those things where we get some doctors occasionally who are like, do you protect this by zip code, you know, in terms of only allowing a certain number of docs? And we're like, no, like, because you're never going to run out of, you know, people struggling with chronic health issues. It's just going
to get worse, man.
Yeah, it is. And so, I mean, to the point that I'm like, I've got friends of mine, Dr. Matt Ogle and other docs here in town down the road from us who are doing the same program. I mean, they're in our program, and I've got no problem with that. Like, down the street, great, good, fine. We're all going to be just fine, because again, it's just a never-ending supply. We're talking about depression, anxiety, fatigue, hormone problems, difficulty losing weight, digestive issues. Like, it's, you know, so anyways, we developed this program. We called it Simplified Functional Medicine. And we have just had, now at this point in time, we've had over 100 providers. We've got chiropractors. We now have a handful of medical doctors, some naturopaths, some nurse practitioners in the program as well. So we've got it's a multidisciplinary. It's not just exclusively for chiropractors. It's basically, if you're seeing patients who are struggling with any of those issues, which is just about any type of provider out there, that's what our whole model is designed to do, is to be a very simple, easy plug and play. You don't have to spend months or years going down all sorts of different rabbit holes in terms of learning clinical stuff. It's just a very straightforward, easy to learn, and yet I would argue too, very sophisticated approach. It's not watered down. It's a very focused approach, and that's been really cool because we've had some docs who have been like really like highly academic in terms of way smarter than me in terms of the clinical side of things, but when they come in and they look at what we've developed in terms of the protocols, they're like, these are solid, and really proud of what we've created. It's a really, really awesome program, but it includes all of the business stuff too. It's not just the clinical, it's the business systems, the communication, the marketing, the team training. It's a really robust,
it's an ecosystem.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, exactly.
I love it, man. It's so cool to kind of go on that journey from knocking on doors, and building skills, to really investing in both the business side and the customer acquisition side, as well as the discipline and building frameworks and innovating in the space. And I think that's what's exciting about it. Now, let's pivot a little bit.
I think you're probably going to pivot where I think you're going to pivot.
I'm going to pivot because I just said innovate in the space, and I think you and I both have a friend who certainly innovated in the Jiu Jitsu space. Yeah. A man that I have a lot of respect for, changed my life in a lot of ways. Professor Keith Owen, the late Professor Keith Owen. Now you met Keith pretty early.
Right when I started my practice. Yeah.
So that was 2009?
2009. I said, we interviewed him on a podcast that we had, and I said it on the podcast 2010, but it was actually 2009 because it was right when we started our practice. I had cold called him to do like a joint marketing venture. I had this idea of, hey, what I'll do is I'll have your students sell vouchers to our clinic, exam vouchers, right, for $35, $40 or whatever. Said, let your students keep 100% of the profits. You just send us new patients. It's a great way for us to, get new patients.
Sure.
And I thought this was the genius idea. I think it still is a good idea. But he was like, nah, I'm not interested. And I'm like, what? And he's like, but you can come in and talk to my students about chiropractic care. I'm a big advocate for chiropractic, especially in jiu-jitsu. And I was like, well, that's cool of you. And so went in and spoke to his students, did a whole PowerPoint presentation for everybody there. And he stopped the whole class and everything for it. Like I came one night and everybody's training, and he's like, hey, we've got Dr. Wollner here. He's going to do a presentation. I want you guys to give him your undivided attention. This is really important stuff. And for him, the thing is number one, he's just such a generous, gracious person, but also he's such a smart and pragmatic person, meaning like he recognized and connected the dots really easily of, look, if this guy can help my students recover faster from injuries and or help prevent injuries altogether, that's going to help my business, in terms of, and he was very clear, always very transparent about that. Like, I recommend chiropractic because it indirectly helps my business, that if you're helping keep my people, because that was something he was always very sensitive of, that I always appreciated as a student of jiu-jitsu as well, is that some schools, and again, my experience in terms of schools is limited because it's not like I've been to tons of different schools. I've been to Keith's school, but I've heard stories of other schools where it's very much you're just kind of thrown to the sharks, and it's this old school mentality of like, well, if you got injured, you're just not tough enough, so sorry, that's what jiu-jitsu is all about, is you got to be tough enough, Yeah. And that never... I've heard stories like that, and that never resonated with me. And I was so grateful that we were at a school where our professor cared that, and again, call it, he cared about it because that would jeopardize his business, and that wasn't the only reason. He cared about us, that too, because he cares about his students. It was both,
So when did you start jiu-jitsu?
Not long after. I met him, and I was like, when I was in college, I took a judo class. And I had all throughout high school trained in Kempo karate, and I was pretty high in the ranks. I was getting ready to get my third degree brown belt, and so I was almost to the end of it. And then I went on my mission. Well, I had these kind of delusional ideas that I was somehow like this really good martial artist and all this stuff. And I was in college, and I bought that book that Hoyler and Hoist Gracie wrote with Kid Peligro back in the day. It was like this big picture book on Jiu Jitsu. Do you remember that?
I don't.
Oh yeah.
No,
yeah.
you're educating me now.
Yeah. So Hoist and Hoyler Gracie wrote a book and it was like this it was like one of the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training manuals I think that has ever been. It was like really glossy and beautiful. Kid Pellegro helped them, took pictures and everything, and so that was my quote unquote jiu-jitsu training, was this book that I had bought and read and looked at the pictures, and I kind of like would move my body in the positions and figure out, like, I guess that's how you do that technique or whatever. And I kind of had this very superficial understanding that a triangle choke is when you wrap your legs around somebody and put their arm this way, and then you know, and an arm bar is when you put their arm between your legs and lift your hips up and break their arm or whatever. I mean, it was pretty much, you know, it. And took the judo class in college, and then but knew somewhere, some way down the road, eventually I knew, like, I want to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and actually like have somebody who knows what they're doing show me what to do.
But that background in martial arts in general and that curiosity around judo and jiu-jitsu is probably what spurred you to reach out to other martial arts instructors.
Totally.
So was it just Keith that you reached out to, or was it others?
Just no, that's not true. I reached out to a Kempo school. I don't even think they're here anymore because I had a background in Kempo. And I remember the instructor there being so condescending to me. So condescending. Like, I knocked on the door, and maybe I didn't communicate well enough. I don't think so, but I was like super nice and polite. And I just remember him looking at me with like disdain, like I'm some sleazy salesman, because I was like introducing myself, because I was just getting out, introducing my chiropractic clinic. And I'm like, so I'm like, which system of Kempo do you guys teach here? You know, just asking an educated question. And I remember him looking at me like with like, what is this idiot trying to get at? And he's like, we teach American Kempo, you know, like super condescending. And so then I responded, well, I understand that you teach American Kempo. I said, is it the Parker system? Is it the Tracy system? And then all of a sudden he realized, oh, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. And so then he's like, it's the Parker system. And I'm like, okay, never mind. You know, so I remember reaching out to other schools and just the one thing I can say totally is that he was so warm about it. Even though he turned me down to the initial thing, he was just so warm and inviting about everything. And I just remember, and I did also meet at the time too, to his credit, I met Mitch Coats.
Oh, sure.
You know Mitch Coats. Yeah. And I love Mitch. He's a super great dude.
I don't know him personally. I've seen him in passing, but never really spoke to him. But
So I met Mitch Coats around the same time, and we had a good relationship too. And I had contemplated at one point in time training with him. But I saw, if I can totally be honest without any disrespect or insult at all, I saw that Keith's school was more my place, if that made sense.
Sure.
I felt more like that was a better fit for me. And that's all I'll say. And I really do, even to this day, like really like Mitch. Mitch is a phenomenal jiu-jitsu, even though he doesn't practice jiu-jitsu now.
You're talking about a time, though, in the Treasure Valley where there was really just two options.
That's it.
Right. It was, was it the base at the time?
Base, it was Mitch, it was Keith, and then Jason Flynn was kind of in the background there teaching people.
Was it called the mat at the time, or did that come later?
A little later, I think.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, I'll have to talk to Jason. I eventually am going to have Jason on the podcast too.
Yeah,
Big
awesome.
Fan of his.
Yeah, Jason's amazing. Such a good dude. Such an incredible jiu-jitsu guy. So right at that time, I was like, yeah, I totally want to train. And Keith is like, that's awesome because I need a new chiropractor. And so he's like, will you be my chiropractor and I'll be your jiu-jitsu instructor? And from that moment on, it was like, awesome. And so I distinctly remember, and I joked with him, but I was like halfway serious too. Like I have been looking all my life for that type of relationship, mentor-student relationship, very much like Daniel and Miyagi. It's funny, at the memorial service, they talked about how Karate Kid was like the pivotal defining movie that changed Keith's life. You know, he saw that, and I was like, that's so funny, because Karate Kid is, if you were to tell me, like, had to choose your top favorite movie, hands down, Karate Kid, hands down. Love that movie. And I love it predominantly because of that dynamic of the mentor-student relationship, and that is so beautiful when you watch that story and you look at the core of the story. It really is that story about the mentor and the student, and so I would always jokingly refer to him as my Mr. Miyagi, even though he's nothing like Mr. Miyagi in the conventional sense. And I mean, Miyagi's short Asian guy. Keith is this massive, tall Caucasian, you know,
looking like a rhinoceros.
Yeah, totally. But very much like Miyagi in the sense that he just was so wise, so incredibly wise, so incredibly caring and thoughtful, and so incredibly gifted in his teaching abilities, right? He just had such a gift for being able to instruct in such a powerful way. And so he would call, anytime he would call me, I would always answer the phone, "Yes, sensei." And I would always and it was half joking, but also half like there was a part of it where it was like I would always, you know, and it was funny because anytime he was here at the clinic, I would always, again, respectfully, but also somewhat jokingly refer to him as sensei, until he became professor, and then it was professor. And likewise, he would never address me as Chad in front of his students at the school. Anytime I was ever in the school, he would always refer to me as Dr. Woolner. And he didn't do it other than purely just out of a sign of respect to me. And so there's just kind of this, like, it was really neat relationship dynamic there in terms of just always so respectful of me, so respectful of my wife, Amber, loved Amber.
Yeah, and your kids all went to Jiu Jitsu as well.
Yeah, my kids started not long after. We've got pictures. They're kind of heartbreaking, but they're really sweet, and I'm super grateful we have them. My wife captured pictures of our son, Sam, who at the time couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, grappling with Mr. Keith. He would, back in the day, you know, when he would start students off, and I don't know if this was for everybody or not, but I assume so, he would have like a private lesson to start them off with to kind of show them the basics behind, like, okay, if you're going to get on the mats, you got to understand. And I think he would use it as a way of assessing our kids ready to be trusted to not goof around when it's wrestling time, if they weren't just going to goof off. And so we've got some pictures of him kind of doing some grappling with Sam. It's really cute, really adorable pictures. But Sam was just a little guy, 6 or 7, and then he started, and then not long after, our daughter Noelle started, which, to put it in perspective now, Sam is 16, Noelle is 14, which is crazy. And they both, this was back when Keith was doing his stand-up class as well. So he, at the time, had kind of 2 divisions in the school. He had a stand-up program and then a ground program, just traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The stand-up was kind of a mixture of his experience that he had with Wu Wei Kung Fu and Thai Kung Fu.
Oh, it's Thai Kung Fu.
Thai Kung Fu and Wu Wei Kung Fu, which were, the Thai Kung Fu was very similar to Kempo, more so than Kung Fu. And then Wu Wei was Joseph Cowles, who was Bruce Lee black belt. Yeah. And so it was very Jeet Kune Do-esque in its background. So he had taken that and he had used the moniker Sport Jiu-Jitsu, which was kind of more of the stand-up kind of stuff. And so both Sam and Noelle, I'm probably more proud of it than they are, both got their junior black belts in the stand-up, which was just really cool, really neat experience. But the thing I will say too, and we talked about this when we interviewed Keith, the thing all along that had always impressed me, and I was such a major advocate for his school, would anytime, anywhere, would constantly praise the school and give testimonials and reviews anytime, anywhere. They really, truly taught life skills to our kids, like incredible life skills. You know, it wasn't like, because I had experience growing up in martial arts with Kempo and with I had done Taekwondo as a kid, and I totally remember, especially in Kempo, because I had spent years there. It was very pragmatic and very much what you see is what you get, in the sense that we're here to learn how to hurt people, you know. And yeah, there was some discipline there, but my instructor, and he was a good dude. He wasn't a bad dude, but it was just very like, here, we're going to show you the techniques, and that's that, you know. That's it, you know. Whereas at Keith's school with our kids, they would learn techniques, and then so let me back up. Every single class they would bow in to Grandmaster Elio and Master Pedro Sauer, and then bow into the instructor, whoever that was, oftentimes Keith. And then they would turn and bow to their parents, and he would have them say at the top of their lungs as they bowed, "Respect." And they would bow every class. That was how they started. And then I'm assuming you've seen a kids class before.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyways, and then what they would do is every single class after they do some, or before they even start training, I think is how they would do it, if I'm recalling correctly. They would have a word of the day or word of the week, and they would sit down and they would talk about it. So they talk about like integrity is the word of the day. So what we're going to talk about is, what does integrity mean? And they would literally ask the kids and get the kids involved in really helping drive deep these foundational principles of life skills. And Amber and I were always so impressed with that. Like, holy cow, they're really truly teaching life skills, you know, and not just saying it. Because I think a lot of martial arts schools say that and just assume that the life skills will be distilled through the art itself,
or the discipline of showing up to class for 3 to 5 years.
And that's fine. Yeah. That's great. You know, I'm not not disrespecting any of that, but they truly went above and beyond just that and really worked hard to instill that. And not only that, but my business partner, Dr. Buddy Allen, was saying one of the things he loved to see about Keith, and I, looking back on it now, I love this too, is that he said anytime kids would get kind of a little bit hurt in class, and when we say hurt, like not majorly injured, just kids get hurt, you know what I mean, to where they're kind of whimpering and crying, kind of like, let's just say being a baby.
Yeah, making victim noises.
Yeah, victim. Yeah, exactly. Keith would never indulge that. He was never mean. He was never cruel, but he would never indulge that. It was the perfect way to respond. He's like, okay, do you need to take a break? Just sit off the mat for a little while. When you're ready to come back, come back. But he would never like indulge them and baby them and, oh, are you know what I mean? He was so perfect at teaching kids like, I've got to be tougher, you know, without being this militant a-hole about it, you know?
Well, you know, and as an adult, he also provided the same perspective. I mean, those folks like myself, I found Jiu Jitsu in my late 20s. I was 29, 28, something like that. I had just had, or my wife was pregnant with our second child that was due like 9 days later. Yeah. So I started Jiu Jitsu on October 1st of 2015, and my daughter was born 10 days later.
Wow.
Right, basically. And I went there because I was having a hard time just chasing my kids or my son around. Right. I was 240 something pounds.
Really?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Whoa.
Yeah. I was out of shape. I had done some stand up. I did a little kickboxing. I did some various forms of like Keishinkan karate and some things like that growing up. And, you know, found my way into this, actually I knew Matt Berther.
Yeah, I love Matt.
I knew Matt because he worked at the same organization I worked at HealthWise.
Matt and I rolled together a lot. Yeah. I love Matt. He is such a good dude.
He's such a good dude. I saw him obviously I saw him at Keith's service, but him and I got coffee about 2 weeks prior. And, you know, at work, he saw I had an On It sticker. On my computers. Yeah. Obviously Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus had this company called On It, or still do. And I was buying like supplements, because that's what you do when you think you're trying to like lose weight and stuff. Right. It's just like, I'm going to go buy Alpha Brain, or I'm going to go buy this or that. And that's going to help me. And I had some, you know, ups and downs with weight, you know, 5 pounds here, 5 pounds there. But he saw it and he goes, hey man, he goes, why don't you just come to Jiu Jitsu with me? And I'm like, what? Really? And he's like, yeah. So I show up first day, just meet Keith, and, you know, he put some things in perspective for me of just like, hey, this is a grind. Like, hey, this can be really fun, but also like you're going to lose a lot. And if you have a lot of ego, this is going to be hard for you. Yeah. And then about a year and a half in, like he actually had to sit down with me, and he's like, hey, listen, like you're going hard. Like you don't want to lose at all. And like, you're bigger. And I had lost quite a bit of weight, and I was starting to get strong. And he's like, hey, you're going to hurt people in here. And I'm not going to have you in here if you're going to hurt people. Right. Wow. And he's like, I know that you're getting hurt, but you're getting hurt because your body is tense and you're attacking these like black belts and these brown belts with like reckless abandonment. He's like, that's not jujitsu. What you're doing is not jujitsu. And you've been here long enough that I have to tell you that. And I have to tell you have to figure out if you want to be here or not. Wow. There's a lot of other schools that'll take guys like you. I won't. And like, for me, I was like, oh shit. Like, here's this guy that I have such a tremendous amount of respect for. Having a difficult conversation with you. Who is not scared to draw a hard line with me. Right. And he actually drew 2 or 3 of those over the course of my time with him. And I respected him so much. Yeah. good or bad or indifferent, he was going to tell you exactly how he felt about you in that moment, what you needed to do in order to stay in his, if I can use the word again, ecosystem, right, of Jiu Jitsu. But I tell you what, when you made that corner, or he saw the improvement, or he saw the whatever, he just poured into you.
Totally.
Like, he gave me so much of his time, so much of his effort, and I'll always thank him for it. But he's on the Mount Rushmore of influential men in my life. Totally. And so I echo the sentiment toward who he was.
You just never. I've reflected on it. It's so surreal now, but I've reflected on it in the sense that he was never on my list of people you would assume would ever be gone. You know what I mean? Like, he's the last person you would assume. And so for me, when I got the call from his son Kerrigan, it was such a punch to the gut. I mean, so shocking. That's the only word I could use, and even that is not adequately expressing it. But I just remember, and then I remember for days after just weeping, and even still, like, I think the memorial service was very healthy for me in terms of getting some closure there to some degree, because it would come in waves. And even the memorial was, you saw when I spoke, I did not.
You did phenomenal.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was rough to get through. It was so hard to get through. But now, like, I'm like us having this conversation here, I'm like, I'm surprised I'm holding it together so well here, because, but yeah, no, when you say that, like, in terms of like influence, such a profound influence that he's had on my life and my children's lives, and my wife really took it hard too, because he was, and I mean this, like, when I say he and I heard the same thing from Tren's wife. So if you guys don't know who Tren is, Tren Long is Keith's, I think, can we call it undisputed top student? Can we just say it?
Sure. Yeah. No, I can't take that away from you. No. Yeah.
He was his first black belt, and I just think, if anybody does want to dispute that claim, you can take it up with Tren and find out.
Yeah, for sure.
But Tren is amazing. Anyways, his wife Lindsay, and I've known Tren and Lindsay for a very, very long time, and my heart breaks for them too, because they were dealing with just getting through the loss of his sister-in-law Krista, who was also a sweetheart, who was also a patient of ours, which was tough for us too. I was like, oh man. But Lindsay was saying at the memorial service, I was talking to her, and she was saying how that was the one thing she knew, is that Keith respected not only Shirlane, but he gave equal respect to the wives of the students as well. So if you were training there, he would give equal respect to your wife. He wouldn't treat your wife as like a second-class citizen, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He cared equally, and that was the thing with Amber. And the thing that I said, I mentioned this on my Facebook post when I posted about his passing, was I said, every time I would post any sort of praiseworthy thing about Amber on Facebook or social media, he always had the same predictable response every time. You can go back, if we can go back and look at those posts, and he would always post this phrase that just was he was just such a class act. He would say, "Some men have it all," is what he would always comment. I'm going to get through it. He would always post that, and that just totally says so much to me about his character and who he was. That was just like the type of guy he was on so many levels, not just that, but in so many other ways too. He was just amazing, absolutely amazing. So anyways, almost got through it.
No, you're doing awesome, brother, man. So, I had not dealt with loss.
Me neither.
Very much.
Me neither.
In my life, and a good friend of mine, his name's Dustin. Shout out Dustin Christensen. Appreciate you, man, because I reached out to Dustin, and over the years, Dustin has had people who are close to him pass away, and I've been, obviously I'm in his kind of inner circle as a friend, but I'm not in his friend group necessarily, right? So all these, these friends, these family members, these people that are close to him, and I understood him as somebody who's had to process a lot of pain.
Sure.
And so he was one of the first phone calls I made. I called him up and I was like, "Hey man, like,
how do you do it?"
Yeah, like, what's your thought process on this whole thing? And he's like, "Hey," he gave me some really good advice. I'm going to share that right now, which is,
please do.
The first thing is, you don't control the size of the hole in your heart, right? It just is what it is.
Yeah.
Like, you don't realize, like, for me, I spent 6 hours a week for 6.5 years with Keith.
Yeah.
Right? Or as often as he was there. So that's, maybe somewhere in that range, but relatively close. You don't control the size of the hole.
And not only that, if I can just interrupt real quick too, it wasn't like those 6.5 hours were, I don't want to like dog something and say like knitting, but well, she's knitting.
Yeah.
Not to offend the knitters out there. But this was like very real stuff that you were learning, like 6.5 hours of very intimate, important,
student-teacher relationship as well, to which you're being a pupil and you're learning and you're
life
looking
skills,
up.
man. Life skills.
When you have questions, he has answers, right? So he's a person who's consistent in your life, somebody who has answers for the thing.
Always had answers. Always.
And if he didn't, he figured it out so quickly, or it would like bother him, and he'd come back to you with 3 other variations of something, and you'd be like, "Oh my God!" So. Excuse me. So you don't control the size of the hole in your heart, but you have to accept that there's something there, and you have to kind of feel that out. The other thing that you don't control is the period of time that it takes to cross the bridge between sadness and fondness.
Yes.
And that's a process. It's a you feel that pain. And sometimes like in the early couple days, I mean, I just was sitting around the house like I just could not believe it.
Right.
Right. And it just consumed almost every waking moment where you're just like, how am I, what do I do now? Like like this hurts. Like what, I can't get coffee without thinking about Keith. Like it was tough. It was difficult. Right. So over time, it becomes now this fondness for the memories that you had and the time that you shared and all those different types of things. And the more that you try to be done with it, the more that you fight against it, the harder it's going to be for you. And the more it'll likely manifest in behaviors that are not positive in your life. So you have to allow the process to happen. So again, just recapping, you don't control the size of the hole. You don't control the duration of time it takes to cross the bridge. Yeah. And the more that you fight against it, the harder it's going to be. You just have to feel.
Well, and to me, I think, boy, how appropriate, what a metaphor that is for jiu-jitsu itself, right? You know?
For me, it's so you don't control the size of the holes in your game. I have plenty of them.
Well, I was just thinking, especially that last part, right, is that the more you struggle, isn't that the biggest lesson we learn from jiu-jitsu is the more you struggle, the worse it is. You know, that there's a certain level of almost beauty in this whole idea of submission, and not submission necessarily in the tapping, although the tapping too, you know, but submission in terms of you find that I'll never forget when I was going to say Horian. It wasn't Horian. It was Huron. Huron Gracie came. Were you at the Huron seminar?
I was not.
Okay. When Huron came, he and Keith rolled, and it was so cool to see because Huron's big mantra is keep it playful. You know, and there was zero ego between either of them, and yet you could see just incredibly technical jiu-jitsu happening between the two of them. It was a really cool thing to watch, and I'm sure they probably have it. I bet Chance has got video footage of it, but it was, in fact, it's probably on YouTube actually, and it was so cool to see the two of them rolling. Because there was a certain level of submission, if you will, that was inherently there. So we'll call it submission of ego, right? It wasn't this need to control anything, either of them. And so it was just this very beautiful, like, if you've ever seen like one of the other videos that I think of that like really expresses like the beauty of jiu-jitsu is the Mendez brothers. They've got like this really beautiful flow, what I mean? It's just this beautiful flow. When you see like really high level jiu-jitsu practitioners rolling, there's a real beauty to it because of that, because when you reach a certain, and I'm not trying to sound like overly philosophical here, I'm just trying to
no, it's an observation.
Yeah, exactly. But when you see there's a certain pinnacle that's reached, and again I would say like shout out to Tren is there, Matt Owen is there, you know, all of Keith's black belts are definitely there, and even some of his higher level, you know, like purple, I've rolled with you too. It's wonderful because, and it's funny you say that about your background of being super muscly and stuff, because I've rolled with you a couple times and I've never gotten that impression from you at all.
I've been working on it a lot.
I've never gotten that impression. And then again, you probably didn't have to utilize a whole lot with me anyway, so that's probably why I didn't notice it. But what I mean by that whole submission again is that when you roll with these upper black belts, it's such a smooth and fluid process versus a herky-jerky white belt who's just like, so like, discordant, uncoordinated, and just so like, everything is about, so dependent on that life or death outcome in their eyes. Whereas, I think the further you evolve, again, there's this kind of beauty of acceptance, if you will, kind of going back to that original thing, where it's like the more you resist, the worse it is. The more you just kind of flow with things and just let things go, the easier it is, the more natural it is, if that makes sense. I don't know if that was a good apt comparison or not, but
that was beautiful. Yeah. It's no doubt.
Yeah.
Jiu Jitsu has had a tremendous impact on my life. It sounds like it's had a tremendous impact on yours and your families as well. It has. No doubt. The world is missing a great mind.
For sure.
And missing a great man in Professor Keith.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing your stories
thank you.
with him as well. It's part of that kind of healing process. I'll probably continue. I definitely will continue talking about Professor Keith on the podcast for a while.
Please do.
And just for the listeners to know, this podcast is produced by Black Badger Media. Black Badger Media is run by a gentleman by the name of Chance Owen.
Love Chance.
And Chance is a good man. He's a dear, dear friend. And he was the son of Professor Keith Owen, the man that we've been discussing. So just a lot of ties, a lot of connection to a great family and a great man. And
I'll just say one last thing too, though.
For sure.
His 3 sons have been very helpful for me in getting through this, in the sense that I've known his sons for a long time. Since I knew Keith, I've known the whole family. They've all been chiropractic patients of mine and very dear friends of mine. And so for me, when you mentioning, I think that's a great kind of circle back to tying this all together. They've been super helpful because to me, that's the closest thing I will get to Keith now. You know what I mean? In terms of, and that was one of the things that kept being mentioned at the memorial service, is how similar.
Oh, dude, it's like putting a Power Ranger together. If you took the 3 of them and you made some like ultimate sword, it would be Keith.
For sure. So anyways, but that's just a great, testament to him, is what an incredible father he was to his boys, and just the fact that those are 3 pieces of Keith that are now there, and that's been super helpful for me.
Yeah, and I don't know Kerrigan very well, but I did a video, an Out Jake's video with Alex, where he taught me to ride a performance horse.
That's right.
And God, man, it's so fun. It was so fun, man. It's good people all around for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So
well, man, hey, we're wrapping up here. You've got an event coming up here in Idaho. Who's that for?
That's predominantly for healthcare professionals.
Okay.
SFM Live. If you go to simplifiedlive.com, we've got one. And basically, it's just an immersive training experience for docs that want to learn functional medicine and how to help people struggling. Well, and I should say this, if you're not a doc and you're a health coach and you want to learn how to help people struggling with chronic health issues, we open it up to health coaches as well. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be really, really good. This is going to be our second one we've done. The first one we did out in North Carolina was a great experience. And this one's going to be end of April. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Anything else going, as well as share where folks can find you, find your clinic, etc.?
Yeah, alignmeridian.com is our clinic, Align Integrated Medical. And we're here in the Meridian, or Treasure Valley, we'll just say that. Treasure Valley. And we help patients with all sorts of struggles. So...
All right. Well, I'll put some links in the notes to the podcast below. Dr. Wollner, thank you so much for sharing the time with me. Oh, man, thank you for sharing your studio with me as well. This has been a fantastic experience to do this face-to-face. Looking forward to the next time you and I get a chance to either connect on the mats or connect professionally or personally as well.
Thank you.